Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, June the 12th, 2025. Today I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to briefly consider the chart for the shooting in Graz, where I think 11 people were killed, including the perpetrator. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this chart, but there is certainly one aspect of interest that I want to talk about. I also want to look at Gavin Newsom, Governor of California, and maybe compare his horoscope with that of Donald Trump. I've just looked at Gavin Newsom's chart, but I want to have another look at his chart, and in a way it's an update. What is going on in his chart. I mean, he is seen as a possible Democrat candidate for the 2028 presidential election, so I thought it might be just interesting to see what is happening for him right now. But before I do all of that, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Thursday, June the 12th. So here is the chart for today, and the top right, that is of course Gavin Newsom. And by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And so, looking at the chart for today, Thursday, June the 12th, we can see that the moon is in Capricorn. The moon is at 7 degrees Capricorn. So it's solidly in this sign. So we have had a sign change. We've just had the full moon, the Sagittarius full moon, and now that the moon is in Capricorn, we can say that the immediate effect of the full moon it is over, and the moon is now not as bright as it used to be, and this full moon this moon moving through Capricorn, of course, it's in an Earth sign. Now we've got both the moon and Venus in Earth signs, so you could say that there is a fair amount of earthiness around. People are grounded. We're perhaps grounded, and we're starting to think about what is important. And maybe in the past it had been difficult to get our priorities right, but now we're looking after ourselves, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Though the question is, how far do we go? We don't want to get accused of being selfish. Now the moon, when it moves into Capricorn, it does make some aspects of interest. Now the first thing that happens when the moon moves into Capricorn is it makes an opposition to Jupiter, and the second thing that happens is it makes a square to Saturn, and that is a reminder that the Jupiter-Saturn square is right upon us. It's over the weekend, and probably in tomorrow's video, my video for Friday, I'm going to be looking in detail at this Jupiter-Saturn square, because I do think that it is a very important event. And so moon opposition Saturn, moon opposition Jupiter, moon square Saturn, it gives us two views. Moon opposition Jupiter might exaggerate. Moon square Saturn, on the other hand, is about coming down to earth, just having to deal with reality, and especially with moon in Capricorn. And it could be that moon square Saturn is more important or more noticeable than that moon opposition Jupiter. Yeah, there might be lots of things we want to do, we might be very enthusiastic, but in the end we have to come down to earth. And then the moon doesn't just make a square to Saturn, it makes a square to Neptune. So, that Saturn-Neptune conjunction could be about fear. We had all these ideas, all these things we want to do, and then we're worried. What might happen if we actually went and did them? Could we actually handle the consequences? And then the moon goes on, makes a trine to Venus, and that trine to Venus is quite pleasant. The moon and Venus, the two sort of female planets, both in Earth signs, making a trine to each other, and that could be quite reassuring. And that sort of might really bring us down to earth in a pleasant way. And then finally, the moon makes an opposition to Mercury, and moon opposition Mercury, there could be questions. We are wondering, are we doing the right thing? And from a communication view, moon opposition Mercury can be uncertain of itself, or might feel that it has to say something, though this moon opposition Mercury, moon in Capricorn opposition Mercury in Cancer, that's not going to be as talkative as, say, moon in Sagittarius opposition Mercury in Gemini. It's not going to, wouldn't be like that. But it does indicate that there are questions, there are concerns, and perhaps things that need to be said. If we don't say them now, we might miss our chance. So that's the broad picture. There's one other aspect that I should mention that I think might be important, and that is, it's a midpoint aspect. And the midpoint aspect I'm thinking about is Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. You see, there's Uranus, there's Pluto, and Saturn's on that aspect. It's exactly conjunct. And so with Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, you think about Uranus-Pluto, you want to change things. You're not entirely happy with the status quo. Uranus-Pluto is quite a revolutionary contact. But when you put Saturn there, that could be quite frustrating. We feel we want change. Change has to be just round the corner, but we can't do it. Or if we do get change, then it might not be what we were expecting. Now, just quickly looking at what Reinhold Ebertin says about Uranus-Pluto and Saturn conjunct the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. That's Reinhold Ebertin in The Combination of Stellar Influences. This is a book I would always sort of recommend that one buys. It's one of the most important astrology books of the 20th century, I think. By extension, the 21st century as well. This whole period of modern astrology. And so the Uranus-Pluto principle, as far as Ebertin is concerned, is the process of transformation. One thing going and that's something else taking its place. And that's what we feel. And he says about Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, one-sidedness, self-will, egoism, stubbornness, hatred, exposure to extremely great pressure by others, separation caused by force majeure. So you can see the frustration of Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. Just give you another view, sort of Alfred Witter, Rules for Planetary Pictures, and another book that I regard as being really important, and just as important, perhaps even more important than Combination of Stellar Influences. And he regards Uranus-Pluto as mutations, bounds to leap, explosions, changes and transformations, which happen quickly, which start suddenly. And so he says Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, abrupt disruption of hitherto development, separations that suddenly bring a change in life overnight. So that gives you an idea. And with Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, it's not like we're necessarily going to experience this, as individuals, but we might experience it as members of society. And here is the picture for Sydney, Australia, as a sort of representative of Australasia and Eastern Asia. So at noon, Sydney, the moon is at 0 degrees Capricorn. So if you are in Australia, the first part of the day is the moon is going to be in Sagittarius. And so you might be really feeling the full moon. And, certainly if you're in New Zealand, the moon won't go into Capricorn until the early afternoon. So in Australasia, it is a day of two parts. And so with the moon in Sagittarius, you're still feeling the new moon, the full moon, and also the moon is void, of course. The moon has made its last aspect. Well, the moon only just. The moon actually is making a trine to Mars. So, maybe yes, the moon is technically void, of course, but that doesn't mean to say that nothing can be done. And I think if you're in Australasia, it might be a good idea to sort of get up early if you've got things to do, and take full advantage of the fact that the moon is making a trine to Mars. And in fact, you have that grand trine between Chiron, Mars, and the moon, which I was talking about yesterday, is going to be around this morning. Again, if you are in Australasia or Vladivostok or Kamchatka, for example, then you may have the opportunity to really make things happen just before the moon moves into Capricorn. And let's now look at the heliocentric view. This is positions of the planets, of course, where we put the sun at the center of the solar system. And it's a fairly similar picture to yesterday. So yesterday, I mentioned the fact that there is a T-square involving Mars, Neptune, and Jupiter. That Mars, Neptune, Jupiter T-square is still very much in evidence. And I would have said that Mars is probably exactly sesquiquadrate the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. So we have high hopes, and perhaps we're hoping for too much. Perhaps we're being unrealistic. And so we have to think in terms of our actions. Are we acting on the basis of anything that can happen, or is it a pipe dream? So that might be a question we need to be thinking about. But if we feel that action is important, we've got to be realistic and work out what can be done, and that's reasonable. With the moon moving into Capricorn, that a sign that is, of course, very grounded. Additionally, we have Mercury making a square to Uranus. And, that Mercury, late Leo, square Uranus in late Taurus, that Mercury square Uranus, it could, very much stir things up. I mean, that is possible. There is going to be agitation, and we should not forget that one aspect geocentrically that is becoming exact is Mars square Uranus. I should probably have made more of that Mars square Uranus geocentrically. Mars square Uranus is quite a dangerous combination, and now we've got Mercury square Uranus. There's something quite impulsive about this chart, and so some of us might rush into things without really thinking it through. Or maybe if it's not us, it's going to be someone else, or it's going to be some group, or as I always talk about, governments. I just think the heliocentric charts are more about governments and larger groups and the collective than the geocentric chart. So let me now look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, June the 12th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you are feeling pretty motivated at the moment. You're still an Aries. You still like to keep your options open, but deep down, you do know what needs to be done, and you want to get on with it, and you can be quite systematic about it, and you are really helped by the fact that the moon is out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. Now it may be that you were just coming out of the full moon, and so with the full moon, Aries, you understood a few things. Certain things became clear to you. You understood, what was important and what was merely trivial, and now you can really sort of put theory into practice, and you can be quite tough about it. Quite disciplined. I mean, perhaps that's what you need to be. And once you've decided that something is important, you can give it your all, and in the process you can really get some very good results. And but you do have to slow down. If you try to do everything at a million miles an hour today, then I don't think you're going to be especially successful. Well, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand and you're up early this morning when when you've got the moon trine Mars and trine Chiron. Maybe in that situation you can do things very quickly and cover a lot of ground, but elsewhere it is a bit slower, and you have to understand the limitations upon you, and also ask yourself, what do people want? What do people want to see? And I think that Aries at the moment, people want to see a fairly disciplined approach, and they don't want to be unsettled by sudden unannounced actions. And if you hold firm, then I think that you'll be really be able to get your way, and don't be distracted. The moon does make a square to Saturn, and I do actually think that the square to Saturn is a positive. I mean, it sounds negative, but remember, Saturn is in Aries. This is a time for Aries to be very focused and disciplined. But Neptune is also in Aries, and so with Moon square Neptune, you might get involved in something you weren't planning on getting involved in, and it might not work. So stick to what matters and stick to what you understand. Now, when handling other people, you can do a good job. You can be reasonable, and you can be reassuring, and that is also the advantage of taking a slow approach. You don't want to frighten anyone. You don't need to frighten anyone, and by taking a slow approach, you can really make a good impression. And there's no need to exaggerate. There's no need to talk too much. I mean, one aspect there is today is we do have Moon opposition Mercury, and that Moon opposition Mercury could be about people saying things, people trying to grab your attention with things that you really don't need to worry about, and be especially careful when dealing with your family. Your family could actually be a distraction, and they might say things or do things that you didn't necessarily want to hear, and you don't want to have to be focusing on too many things at once. And if you can be single-minded, Aries, then I think that would be well worth it. And as far as relationships are concerned, well, there's a trine between the Moon and Venus. The Moon and Venus it's a good aspect. It's not an exciting aspect, but it's a good aspect, and it does allow you to bring things down to earth. And relationships have many levels, and there is a practical level, and your attention to practical details that might underpin a relationship, whatever that relationship is about, could be reassuring and could be grounding, and could actually help a relationship progress to the next stage, whatever that next stage might be. Taurus, it's quite an earthy day. Recently, we've had periods when there hasn't been much earth. We've always had Uranus in Taurus, but with this lack of earth for the average Taurus, it could have been a bit disconcerting. You weren't quite sure what was going on. You might even have been sort of unsure of the ground under your feet. But fortunately, things are changing, and we know that Venus is in Taurus. Venus is in your sign, and now the Moon is in Capricorn, another Earth sign. And so, we've got Moon trine Venus today, and Moon trine Venus it's a great aspect. Okay, not an exciting aspect. Moon in Capricorn trine Venus in Taurus. It doesn't suggest fireworks, a huge amount of activity, but it's solid, and it allows you to get your bearings, and also it says something about the way you come across. You come across as someone who is a stabilizing influence, and Taurus, people are going to like you, and people, I think, are going to find you relatively, reassuring. Though, you don't have to feel that you've got all the answers here. The moon might be in Capricorn, but it is in a part of your horoscope that is quite expansive, that is looking for something else, and it might be a time where you can discover new things, but in such a way that doesn't unsettle you. It can actually be just a reinforcement of what you already know. And if there is a challenge, then it's not a serious challenge. It's just about you just acclimatizing to new things and new ways of doing things, new ways of working. And so, you can be open-minded, but, you don't have to be totally open-minded. You just don't have to take everything that comes your way. You have a clear idea about what is important and what is probably of only secondary significance. And additionally, Taurus, you are a person who can be trusted. You give that impression, and so that means it's perhaps important that you trust yourself, but you trust yourself to have a certain authority and knowledge, and even in certain situations, you may have the opportunity to lay down the law, so telling people, this is the way it is, and that this is the way it is. And I think at the moment you have a really good understanding of the limitations that we all work under. There are always limitations, and your limits, and everyone else should know their limits, and you can perhaps explain those limits, and you can explain those limits in a way that, if necessary, can be quite forceful. So if you do have any position of authority, then use that position of authority. If you don't have a position of authority, then you can still be an authority, because there are things and understand that other people don't necessarily realize. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I've just said that the moon is trine Venus, and of course Venus is in Taurus, and Venus is the planet of love. It's a planet of getting on with people, and with moon trine Venus, you do know how to get on with people, and you know what to say, you know what not to say, and you are someone who is reassuring. And so if you are in a relationship, or you're trying to be in a relationship, you'll just come over as being fairly safe and a grounding influence, and I think that could very much be appreciated. Gemini, things have changed, haven't they? Okay, the sun is still in your sign, but not for much longer. Okay, the sun has moved into the third decade of Gemini, and so within just over a week, the sun will be in Cancer. Is it? God, it's as early as that, is it? I mean, it's 8 days. The sun will move into Cancer. It will be the summer solstice, or at least in the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. And the Gemini season will be over. And you've already experienced Jupiter leaving Gemini and Mercury leaving Gemini, and so there is a question of how you are able to adjust to these changes. And when you look around you and you see what's going on, you realize that that things are more serious than you'd realized. Not serious in a bad way. It's just that you have to take the time to understand what's going on, and things are not moving at lightning speed. Absolutely not. And you have to take the time, Gemini, to really understand what is going on, and you can't sort of dwell on surface appearances, but you shouldn't ignore surface appearances. When you talk about surface appearances, people always say, well, there's something bad about surface appearances. Well, there's something bad about only focusing on surface appearances. Yeah, indeed, if you only focus on them. But you have to start with something. And what something looks like on the surface shouldn't be discounted. But you just have to be prepared to go further. And at the moment, that, Gemini, is something you can do. And you need to ask questions, ask yourself questions, and maybe also consider who your friends are, who can help you out, who can allow you to achieve your purpose. And it might be the moon is making a square to Saturn. It might be that you realize that not everyone is helping you in terms of your movement from A to B. Some people could be holding you back, and you need to understand that, and do make some adjustments. And so when dealing with your social life, you certainly can't take people at face value. And this is a reminder that Saturn has just gone into Aries, and so over the next couple of years, there could be some changes in your social life, in who your friends are, and it's just starting. And the moon square Saturn, might be a reminder of that. And additionally, Gemini, in many cases, you are going to have a good sense of right and wrong. And if that sense of right and wrong is being confronted, or you can see someone behaving in a way that is not right, then, Gemini, you're in a great position to intervene, and you can intervene in a way that is not challenging, that can get people to change their behavior without you having to have an argument about it. So, I don't know what the situation might be. For example, if someone's making a lot of noise or is upsetting your peace of mind, and that they're breaking city rules or whatever, it is likely that you can get people to understand what they're doing, and to get them to understand that they are breaking the rules. And you can actually use the rules for your own benefit. And you don't have to be a lawyer or an administrator to be able to do that. The ordinary individual can do that as well. So things connected with law and government and administration shouldn't just be discounted, thinking, oh, it's too complicated for you, you don't understand that, it's not part of your training. Don't take that view. As a Gemini, you're a fast learner. Plus, you probably don't have to learn anything. You already know it. And so you and the law, you and systems of rules can actually work very well. Of course, there's always scope for caution. Sometimes telling someone to turn the music down can end in tragic consequences. So you've got to judge the situation. But I think that is something that you are able to do. And another thing, Gemini, is that today may be a time when you can benefit from something that on the surface seems to be bad. You see something, you don't like it, you recoil from it, but actually, if you're intelligent and flexible, this situation that you don't like can actually work in your favor. Cancer. Cancer, you find it difficult to ignore what other people are doing. You might like to ignore it, but I think it could be hard. And so do take an interest. At the very least, be prepared to just observe and take notes and consider the kind of impact that other people could have on you, and then you might be able to adjust your strategy and use your Cancerian sensitivity, which at the moment is on good form. Well, it has to be on good form. Jupiter's now moving through your sign, and that is that's a major plus. So do make an effort to see things from another person's point of view. If that's going to help you, it's not that you're only thinking about other people. That's not what it's about. Because if you don't understand what people are doing, what people are thinking, then you're going to be confused at a later stage, and you do have to accept the fact that other people's actions could have an impact, and this means that there may be times during the day, particularly at the beginning of the day, when it occurs to you that you and some people apparently don't get on. You have different ways of doing things, you have different ways of working, and you might actually resent other people's influence, and you shouldn't. You are yourself quite a powerful, influential person, but you're not the only person around, and some people have their own power base, and they have a degree of charisma, and that might not be something you always appreciate. But if someone is in a powerful position, ask yourself why, and what is it about. Ask yourself, what attributes do they have that makes them powerful, and how are they using their power, and perhaps why are they using their power. Maybe the why is the important question. What actually are they trying to achieve? So that's something, Cancer, that you should be thinking about. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, there is an opposition between the Moon and Mercury, and this Moon Mercury opposition is right across the main axis of your chart. You got Mercury in Cancer, Moon in Capricorn, and so this Moon Mercury opposition, it could be quite verbal. And so if you are talking to someone, especially if that person is important to you, or if you're in any kind of relationship with them, and if you're having serious words with them, you do need to monitor the situation, because Moon opposition Mercury might suggest a misunderstanding. And ironically, the more words that are spoken, the greater the misunderstanding might be. And it may be a situation where if you do have a misunderstanding with another person, you feel that there is a problem, it might be best to say nothing. Now, that might be a situation you're not comfortable with, because you want the thing resolved, but sometimes one's attempts to resolve a misunderstanding, at least in the short term, can actually make the misunderstanding even worse. So perhaps at least in the short term you could bide your time, or at least not say more than you have to. Now, one aspect we do have, it's not just about moon opposition Mercury, it's about, there is moon trine Venus, and it may be, Cancer, that moon trine Venus and moon opposition Mercury represent two options. Do you want to have a moon opposition Mercury day, or do you want to have a moon trine Venus day? A moon opposition Mercury day is about struggle. It's verbal, and it's not necessarily very satisfactory because it is an argumentative nature. Yeah, there's lots of communication, but just because you've got lots of communication doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing. Moon trine Venus, on the other hand, is entirely positive, I would have said. And it's not a very verbal aspect. It's just about accepting another person's presence. Even if you feel that something needs to be said, doesn't mean that actually anything does have to be said. And moon trine Venus could just be just being in someone's presence, there in your presence. There's the possibility of acceptance and understanding, and you being able to come over as being a pleasant and responsive person, and you also being pleasantly surprised by some of the people you meet and some of the people you get close to. So perhaps you should really try to concentrate on that moon trine Venus if you want to have a pleasant and relaxing day. Leo, you do have a feeling about your own power. I mean, that's Leo. Leo is a sign that can be quite power orientated, and you want to know, how much control you have, and you certainly don't want to be ignored or neglected. And there is something about you, Leo, that is quite electric, and it is a day that actually isn't very electric. It's quite a low profile day, with the moon in Capricorn, trine Venus in Taurus. But if you want to get attention, you can turn on the electricity, and you do have a certain buzz about you, and that buzz is difficult to ignore, and you can show your power and your authority in actually ways that are quite unexpected. But don't push it too far. There'll be moments when you can have an influence, when you can get people to pay attention to you, but it can't be the pattern for the whole day. And you have to think about what else is happening. And one thing that is happening today is that the moon is making a trine to Venus. I was just talking to Cancer, and I was saying to Cancer that that they should really try to focus on that moon trine Venus, because it is a fortunate aspect, and it can be very helpful as far as allowing Cancerians to get on with other people. And for you, it is a similar message. Do concentrate on the moon trine Venus. Moon trine Venus is what you present, the kind of image you are showing to the world around you, and that moon trine Venus allows you to get things done and to get noticed, and you can get noticed, but not in a way that always has to be about about a clash and a dynamic tension. Because Leo, it is a day which is quite grounded. It's not necessarily going to be an especially exciting day, but that moon trine Venus allows you to actually exercise a gentle authority, a gentle charm, And if you want something done, it can be done, and it can be done your way. And yes, you have the capacity to be electric, to get people's attention in a quite dynamic, though maybe somewhat jarring way. You can do that, but it doesn't mean you have to do that. And if you quietly say what you want, how you want things to be, then I think that in most cases, people are just going to listen, and there's an excellent chance that you will get your way, and also what really matters is good organization. If everything is properly organized, then that does help, and I think you're going to appreciate organization and clarity, and that's what you want. You need clarity, whatever you're doing, and it's about your well-being. If things are ill-defined, if you don't know what's happening, if things are all up in the air, you're going to feel stressed out, and you're going to feel out of sorts. But all of that is unnecessary, and you express what you want, and you express how you'd like things to be, and everything can fit together. Sure, you've got to do a little bit of work, but I don't think too much work. Virgo, we have the moon moving through Capricorn, and of course Capricorn is an earth sign, and Virgo is an earth sign. So moon moving into Capricorn, Virgo, is something for you to welcome. It's not just stabilizing, it also does give you a sense of purpose, and you start to feel what actually matters to you, and what makes you a creative individual. And of course creativity is very often about hard work, but hard work that you enjoy doing, and deciding what you need to do to make the most of your God-given talents. And if you are making the most of these talents, then can you go wrong? Well, I don't think you really can go wrong. I mean, it is all for the good, and things will work out very well for you. And the moon in Capricorn, it does make a trine to Venus in Taurus, and this is a great aspect, and it's fortunate, and it's pleasant, and it doesn't disturb your peace of mind, and it does allow you to forge new relationships with other people on your terms. But we're not talking about power relationships where you've got winners and losers. It's just a general feeling of well-being. And this moon trine Venus, it's in earth signs, as I just said, Capricorn and Taurus. So really this moon trine Venus is kind of aspecting Virgo, so it's really having a big influence on Virgo, on your sign, and it just does make you feel good and confident, and being able to sort of move into areas that perhaps under normal circumstances you would have shied away from. And you should not be afraid of going into places that you don't necessarily understand, or dealing with things that are slightly over your head. And Virgo, there is a possibility actually that you can benefit from things that may not be especially savory. Now, I'm not advocating that you do anything dangerous or illegal here. Things go wrong, and it happens, and things go wrong in people's lives. And when things go wrong in people's lives, sometimes it's necessary for someone else to come in and sort the problem out. And it might be that you're just the person to do that. And so do consider the human dimension. And also, when something goes wrong for another person, it is possible that you can benefit from it. And it's just the way it is. Of course, it depends on your situation, but certainly if you have a job where you're in a situation where you might be benefiting from other people's problems, then that job might work very well for you. One way or another. Whatever that job is. Whether it's being a plumber or a therapist or some kind of troubleshooter. You can actually not just engage with other people and their woes, but you might be in a situation to really help them. So, where there is a problem, you're in a position to sort it out, and that might actually be part of your responsibility. And additionally, Virgo, I think that today you can actually have quite a good relationship with authority. And authority is sometimes something that one is afraid of. One doesn't always understand authority and the rules under which authority is working. But Virgo, you understand it all. And where there is authority, where there are rules, there is a possibility for Virgos to step in and maybe take advantage of a situation, or even utilize sets of rules for your own benefit. Libra, we have the moon moving into Capricorn, and with the moon moving into Capricorn, it could be quite a calming influence, provided you handle it in the right way. Because the moon in Capricorn does make a few aspects, and not all of these aspects are easy. I mean, the moon does make an aspect, but the moon does make a square to Saturn, and it makes a square to Neptune. And that moon square Saturn, okay, it does create the possibility of feeling that another person is getting your way, is upsetting your peace of mind. And at the same time, with moon square Neptune, some people are just confusing and unnecessarily confusing. But I reckon that doesn't have to be the case. I think that if you want to have a quiet day, you can have such a day. And if you want to just do things in your own way, you can. But you have to be very careful about social contacts, and particularly with contacts, with people who are around you all the time. And it might be the less the better, because some people can be a pain, and they could spoil your day if you give them a chance. But I don't think you need to give them a chance. And we should regard, or you should regard, the main aspect of the day. But the aspect to really be focusing on is a trine between Moon and Venus. Moon in Capricorn, trine Venus in Taurus. And, remember, Venus is in Taurus. Venus is your ruler. Venus is in the sign of its rulership. So that Moon trine Venus can actually, be a major blessing. And it's all about enjoying yourself, but in your own way, and feeling comfortable, and feeling so comfortable that you can do things that you wouldn't normally do, and you can actually be quite intense about it. I do use this word intense, probably too much, but intense. I mean, it has difficult and problematic connotations. Oh, it's so intense, it's so difficult, it's problematic. But intense has another way of, there's another way of looking at it. It's just getting into something in detail, just one thing, and actually realizing the power of something. And with that moon trine Venus, you can understand the underlying power of an important matter, and it won't bother you. It actually could be helpful, and it may give you a strong sense of who you are and what you can achieve. And maybe the less interference there is from other people, the better for everyone, but particularly the better for yourself. And you are the one that matters. You are the one that should matter. And it could be a day where conversations should be declined. Some people want to talk, and you may have to talk to them a bit, but you don't want to talk to anyone too much, because too much talking could wreck the day, and that's absolutely not something that you want to do. So Libra, decide what's important, and try to have a day where you are the one creating the rules, and also look after your own space. It matters, and it is somewhere where you can flourish. And from a sort of a work professional view, if that's relevant, I think that you're going to be on best form when you are doing things in your own way, at your own pace. And too much social contact could weaken you, and just could make you feel annoyed. And one long conversation could actually spoil the day, and that is not something that you want to happen. Scorpio, you are able to give the impression that you are a pleasant person, and you're someone who really can be trusted today. And you don't have to do very much. You just have to be yourself, and you don't have to do anything dramatic. And a lot of it may be about responding. I don't think there's anything, actually, Scorpio, that you have to create. You don't have to worry about being original, being the one to take the initiative. Just see what other people are doing, see what the world is doing, and respond in a way that is sympathetic and polite. And that will very much be appreciated. And we do have this aspect, moon in Capricorn, trine Venus in Taurus. And so Venus is moving through your opposite sign. Taurus is opposition Scorpio. So with moon trine Venus, that really does give you a chance to to just get on well with people. But it's not about power. It's just about talking about nothing special, but at the same time being reassuring. People want reassurance, and Scorpio, at the moment, that's something that you can provide. Now, you might have an ulterior motive, not for today. Not regarding what you're trying to achieve today, but you might be looking at the future, and there could be an ulterior motive. And you might be of opinion, well, if you're nice to people now, and if you do things on their terms now, then that's setting yourself up for the future, for whatever you're trying to achieve in the future. And that sounds somewhat manipulative, but I don't think it's manipulative in a bad way. You're just looking ahead, and you're realizing what does need to be done, and what needs to be done right now is for you to be pleasant. And if you can be pleasant, then it's going to be remembered. And later on you're going to be in a position where you can take advantage of a situation if need be. And relationships in general today should really work well. You can get on with people you already know, and again, it's not about trying to bring anything new to the table. In fact, you shouldn't bring anything new to the table. Yeah, there might be things you want to talk about, but not today. I mean, there's a temptation there, but the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and so with a moon opposition Mercury, too much talking could spoil things, particularly if you're talking about stuff which is new, which is controversial. You don't want any of that, and instead, it's all about making yourself feel comfortable, and it's about making perhaps another person feel comfortable. And with that approach, you can really settle things and put yourself in other people's good books. Now, from a heliocentric view, Mars, of course, Mars is your ruler. There is a heliocentric T-square. So let me just remind you of that heliocentric T-square. And so that's a heliocentric picture. There is Mars, your ruler. That's opposition Neptune. It's square Jupiter. Mars is actually on the Jupiter-Neptune sesquiquadrate. And let's say again. Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. So that heliocentric chart might say something about you and what you're thinking about. And some Scorpios might be thinking that lots of things are possible. I know that moon is in Capricorn, and Capricorn moon in Capricorn is supposed to be very realistic and down to earth, but you're still thinking about other things, and you're believing that something could happen that could be really good, and it could be about faith, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with faith. But if you act on the basis of faith on its own without any backing, then that might be unwise, and it might lead you to disappointment. And so that disappointment is unnecessary. So if you are doing anything, if you make the decision to take any action based on a hope, really think about what you're doing, and also look at the hope around you. A lot of people are showing a new optimism, and that might be to do with Jupiter moving into Cancer. And again, nothing wrong with optimism, but realism should not be forgotten. And you could argue that aspect is about certain people having fantasies about what is possible, and you, Scorpio, realizing that it's not possible. And then the question is, what do you do? Well, you could intervene. I don't think you should intervene today, because that might spoil things. I think you just want today for getting people's trust, but it might become it might become obvious to you that some people are living on a cloud. They don't know what they're doing, and they're chasing a dream that just can't happen. And with that awareness comes eventually action. But I don't think there's anything you need to say or do today. It's just a situation where you just need to take notes. Sagittarius. The moon is now out of your sign. The full moon is over. I mean, it's not fully over. Full moons can take 2 weeks to run their course, maybe even longer. But the immediate impact of the full moon is over, and now that the moon is in Capricorn, you you might want to slow down, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand. I mentioned this, that if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then this morning the moon is in late Sagittarius, making a trine to Mars and Chiron. So if you're an Australian or you're Sagittarian, or if you're from New Zealand or maybe Vladivostok, then there's a slightly different picture where get up early and do as much as you can. Be a real Sagittarius. Take advantage of every opportunity, and by lunchtime, hopefully the work will be done. But if you're not in Australia or East Asia, I think that there's going to be a sense that things are slowing down, that things are not as frenetic as they used to be, and you need to consider, various realities, and having to deal with, the real world, and the world of details and money and books having to balance, and that's the experience of the moon being in Capricorn. And so do try to be as down to earth as possible. And when it comes to money, it may be that some Sagittarians are having a lot of thoughts about the matter, and so when you start thinking about money, it may be difficult to stop, and you could actually, in certain instances, find yourself thinking too much about money. Moon is opposition Mercury, and that moon opposition Mercury, once you start thinking about money, well, it might be difficult to stop, and you're thinking about all the things you would like to do, and all the reasons why you can't do them. So you don't want to get, of course, too obsessed about money, and instead you should maybe make an effort to be grounded, and rather to worry about all the things that could go wrong, start to think about what is possible. And arguably the main aspect today is a trine between the moon and Venus, and for you, Sagittarius, this moon trine Venus could actually be very helpful. It could allow you to be sensible, and you could take a problem and reduce it to its component parts, and in your own way, in a very careful way, you can take action to sort the problem out, one step at a time. And additionally, Sagittarius, you will still have a strong sense of what needs to be done, a strong sense of purpose, and you're not powerless. You're not powerless by any means. And if you feel that something has to change, something has to give, then you're in a good position to make it happen. But you don't have to be dramatic about it. It's not about making a scene. It's about slowly, one step at a time, making the changes that you feel are necessary. And might seem boring at the time, but one change leads to another change, and in the end, everything is sorted out, everything is complete, and you are where you want to be. Capricorn, there's no reason why it can't be a great day. Things can happen on your terms, and you don't have to, give in to outside pressure. And, also, you are, pretty stubborn at the moment. And I think stubborn in quite a fortunate way. Why should you do things another person's way? Why should you, put yourself out for something you don't necessarily agree with, or you don't think it's important? And so, if you hold firm, I think that you will be well pleased with the result. Moon in Capricorn, it is making a square to Saturn. That is true, And moon square Saturns have the moon square Saturn aspect has a somewhat problematic reputation, but in your case, moon square Saturn should really allow you to define who you are, define your limits, and you can make absolutely sure that you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, because that is absolutely unnecessary. And in a process, you don't have to upset anyone. You can just be very calm and quite soothing about it as well, because the moon, having made a square to Saturn and Neptune, it moves on to make a trine to Mercury. Sorry, it makes an opposition to Mercury, and it makes a trine to Venus. And okay, the sequence is the moon makes square to Saturn, then it makes a square to Neptune, then it makes a trine to Venus, and then it makes an opposition to Mercury. And one of those aspects is universally positive, and that is the moon trine Venus. And that is the aspect you need to concentrate on, or you should be concentrating on. And perhaps we're talking about choice here. You always have a choice, and that may be part of what astrology is. There is a view with astrology that it's not just about you accepting your fate. It's about working with the planets and seeing where the possibilities are. And the moon trine Venus is a possibility, and that's what you need to emphasize. And so moon trine Venus is a fortunate aspect. And it's fortunate for you because the moon is in Capricorn and Venus is in Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. Venus is in its own sign. And so that moon trine Venus can actually allow you to be someone who, is very, very pleasant. And you won't rock the boat, but at the same time, everything happens your way. So there's no need to assume a conflict. Now, you could assume a conflict because of that moon opposition Mercury. It could be that you just want to talk too much, you want to pick a fight, or pick an argument. You could do that with moon opposition Mercury. And it is a possibility. But you don't have to. And it might be a case of, the less said, the better. And if you just concentrate on what is there, on what is in front of you, and you don't talk about it, and you just enjoy the moment, and you also enjoy doing what you enjoy. And it's a very creative aspect, moon trine Venus, and it allows you to really present who you are and what you're good at, and what you enjoy. And you don't have to justify it, you don't have to explain it. It's not a contest, it's just the way it is. And with that relaxed approach, there'll be few things that can stop you, and also people are going to like you. You just come over as being a nice person. And so you could say, but today, if you make the right choices, going for the moon trine Venus rather than the moon opposition Mercury, if you make the right choices, things should actually work out very well for you. And at the same time, you'll be popular, and people will find that you are a comforting and reassuring influence. Aquarius, it's probably a day where you may feel that you can't really be bothered. There's nothing specific that you want to do, and even if there is something you want to do, you may take the view, well, what can you do? Can you really have an influence? Maybe not. And if you feel you can't have an influence, then why bother? And if you do try to make things happen, then it might feel that there's a good chance that it will sort of backfire, or you might feel sort of void of power. And that's one way of looking at things, and you might have a point, though perhaps you have to ask yourself, where is your power? Where does your power lie? And at the moment, your power might not lie, in the sort of outside world, and it could be a situation where other people do have more power than they should, but that's just the way it is, and it's perhaps just best to be relaxed about it. There is a trine between the moon and Venus, and for Aquarians this could be a very relaxing trine. Moon and Venus are both in very low profile sectors of your chart, although Venus in Taurus is in an angular angular sign. Angular from the sign Aquarius. And so, this indicates that if you just, do things in your own way, at your own pace, and you don't allow anyone to sort of push you around, then you'll be fine, and that's your day, and nothing more to have to worry about. Though the moon does make a square to Saturn and Neptune, and that moon square Saturn could be sort of aggravating. There may be times, particularly at the beginning of the day, where you feel that there's something you really would like to say, and you just don't have the chance. I don't think this is the case if you're in the Americas, but if you're in Europe or Asia, Australasia, there may be moments with that moon square Saturn where you just feel that you can't express yourself, and that might be irritating. But do you need to express yourself? And the answer actually, may be no. You can still have thoughts, and one aspect what we do have, a midpoint aspect, which I talked about at the beginning of this video, is Saturn conjunct the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, and I think this is a big deal. Saturn is quite close to 0 degrees Aries, and there's Uranus, there's Pluto, and Saturn is right on that midpoint. And some Aquarians might actually feel a real feeling of your frustration. There's something you want to do, something should be done, and it's about change, a feeling that a transformation is required, that the way things are, it's just no good, that something has to move, something has to shift. And Aquarius, I think this frustration may be a good thing. If you're not feeling frustrated, then you don't have the motivation. And so Aquarius, over the course of the day, you may become aware of a responsibility to actually do something. Maybe it's not just over the course of the day. This Saturn on Uranus-Pluto midpoint, it's been forming for some time, and it's pretty much exact today. But over the next few days, maybe even week, do think about it. Think about how you'd like things to be, and what changes you feel you need to bring about. And Aquarius, you can be a visionary, and you can be a revolutionary as well. Although, it is a word, revolutionary, that is often associated with Aquarius. But in practice, if you actually look at the big revolutionaries, they often actually aren't Aquarians. So maybe that's a theoretical link between Aquarius and revolutions, but maybe it's not as accurate as the textbooks and the stereotypical view of astrology might claim. But nonetheless, at some level, Aquarius, I think that you perhaps do feel that a revolution is needed. It could be a revolution in your own head. It could be a revolution in your own society. Of course, you've got to keep it legal and keep it safe. But maybe at some stage things cannot keep going in the way they have, and a change is going to be necessary. And that's something you can work through privately over the next day or two. And then, the moon does move into Aquarius, pretty soon. It's in Capricorn, so the next sign on is Aquarius. So that is something to be looking forward to. And, the moon will still be in Capricorn tomorrow, Friday, but over the weekend, the moon will be in Aquarius. So then you can rethink the situation. Pisces. Pisces, you are actually able to make things happen. You may doubt that. You may think that things just are, too complicated. There's too much going on. How important are you really? Maybe you're just, such a minor player that nothing matters. But you'd be wrong there. You are able to have an impact, and if there's something you want, then you can get it. And if you want to get people to understand, you can make them understand. And your willpower at the moment is actually very, very strong. So do not doubt yourself. And also, this is all part of the experience of Jupiter moving into Cancer. Don't forget it's happened. Jupiter's no longer in Gemini. Jupiter is in Cancer, sign of its exaltation. And so, in general, this does put you in a position where you really can have a strong sense of self and a strong sense of what actually is possible. And, as far as your social life is concerned, the moon is making a trine to Venus. It's a very pleasant trine between the moon and Venus, and it's a very pleasant aspect. Moon in Capricorn, Venus in Taurus. It's not necessarily dramatic, but Aquarius, you can get noticed, and you can get on with people. There isn't much friction. There needn't be much friction with this moon trine Venus, provided you don't say too much, because we've got moon trine Venus and moon opposition Mercury. That moon opposition Mercury could be a problem aspect, and if you say too much, if you talk to someone, if you raise issues, well, okay, you can talk to someone, but if you start to raise complicated issues, or you start to deal with a controversy, controversial matters, then that could really spoil things. But it needn't spoil things, and perhaps you need to keep things simple and uncontroversial, and focus on pleasantries rather than analysis. There's always a place for analysis and giving your viewpoint, but I don't think today is one of those days. And in fact, I've just said that you're powerful, but where is your power? And your power isn't necessarily about sort of directly telling people what to do, dumping your opinions onto them. Maybe that can come later, but not at the moment. Right now it's about getting on with people, forging links, and you can just do it just so easily. And it's just about being yourself and just being a Pisces, going with the flow. And so that is something to work on. And all the while, you're building up your presence, you're building up your social capital, and you know what you want. You really do, and you can get what you want, but just don't be in a hurry. It will happen. If you're not happy with something, then don't force the pace. Eventually, you will have your chance to make the changes that you feel are required. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. And, I always, with the I Ching, just to remind you, I always say out aloud what my question is. And, with the I Ching, with any oracle, I think it's always a good idea to write down what you're asking. Because if you don't write down what you're asking, you might forget, you might not be precise enough, or you might be worried that you're getting an answer to a different question. But by writing it down, you're making sure that it's very, very specific. So the question I asked is, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 20, contemplation. Contemplation is not an active hexagram. Absolutely not. It's not about taking action. It's about observing. And you might be prepared to take action. And, one sort of image of it might be that to say, I think one version of the I Ching, I think, might say, the ablution has been made, you've washed your hands, but you are not ready to actually take action. So you prepared for action, but you haven't done it. You haven't gone through with it. And so just watch what other people are doing. And you may not know enough to be able to take the initiative, and you may be thinking about the different possibilities, but all the while you are thinking about what needs to be done. And over the course of the day with contemplation, you kind of know what needs to be done. And that does give you a feeling of confidence. And you may get further confidence by getting close to certain people. This I Ching talks about this, because there's a moving line. And the moving line, the fourth line from the bottom moves. And it talks about proximity to the king. So if you are close to the king, if you are even maybe a guest of the king, then his power, or if it's a queen, her power, whatever, rubs off on you. And so you can benefit from another person, and being close to the ruler. That's another way of looking at it. You get close to the ruler, get close to the source of power, without doing anything. This is contemplation. This is not a very, it's not at all an active hexagram, but someone else's strength, you can actually benefit from it, but you are not the initiator. And because we've got a moving line, we do move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 56, which is the wanderer. So in the previous hexagram, we saw that we really didn't have a great deal of power in ourselves, although we were not necessarily in a weak position. I don't think we were in a weak position, but we just weren't able to initiate. And then the wanderer kind of reinforces this. The wanderer, we're in a position where we are somewhere where we don't really know the rules. And we might literally be a wanderer, if we're traveling if we're in a foreign country, or we're involved in tasks which are foreign to us. We don't really know what we're doing. And we just need to be aware of our position. And that's the key. That is the key to being a wanderer. And you are vulnerable being a wanderer. You can't make assumptions. And you have to take whatever help is available. And I do think that help will be available. And so the key to having a good day is really to be aware of one's weaknesses, and not to feel that one actually has to take any initiatives. And rather we should be taking what we can from other people. I mean, I don't mean taking as in taking advantage of them, but using their power, because their power can be our power. And if we get close to people who are strongly placed, then I think that we can benefit. So overall, I do think a bit of humility is actually quite important today. And so let's now look at the astrology. I wanted to start off by looking at the shooting in Graz, which happened on the 10th. I don't really have a lot to say about it, but there is just one thing I wanted to point out. And so this shooting took place in Graz, which is a city in southern Austria, and it was in a high school. And it was the perpetrator. We don't know anything about the perpetrator in terms of birthdays. They just given a name for him because of confidentiality. And he was in his early 20s. Someone was saying he'd been bullied while he was in the high school, and he went back. I think he killed 10 people and then killed himself, and a lot of other people were wounded. And I think it was one of the worst shootings in Austria. And I think it's quite a hunting culture in Austria. A lot of people have guns, and so it's not just in America where you get these kind of events. And so here's a chart of the Graz shooting. I don't think that this chart is in itself especially spectacular. We have Venus. We have Venus on the midheaven, and so Venus on the midheaven is not an aspect that one would normally associate with a shooting. Venus might be in Taurus. Taurus can be a very stubborn sign, but do you really associate it with shooting? Venus is square Pluto, so Venus square Pluto could be about sort of jealousy and resentment, and you also see that true black moon Lilith is on the IC. I mean, it's not exactly on the IC. So there was a T-square involving Venus, true black moon Lilith, and Pluto, which was on the midheaven. And additionally, there was one exact aspect that really stood out, was Mars and Chiron. So Mars was in the first house. So Mars first house, you could say that describes a shooting, a violent event. And it was exactly no orb trine Chiron. And so you could say, well, Mars is anger about how this person had been treated in the past. Chiron is the wound from the past. And with Mars trine Chiron, it was very easy to express that anger. The anger just came out, and it was easy to kill all those people. So that might be one way of looking at it. And also, we are living in violent times, and while this aspect isn't directly related to this shooting, look at Mars. Mars is square Uranus, so Mars was trine Chiron. Mars is coming up to that square Uranus. Mars square Uranus is about guns and violence, and you could say, well, Mars is in the first house, Uranus is in the 10th house. So the symbolism fits, and unfortunately the moon is in the 5th house, so the moon 5th house is relating to children. I don't know about the age of those killed. I don't think they were young children, but it was still children who were killed, and that's what this event was about, and this is part of the reason why this event is so specifically disturbing. So when you look at these kind of events, you often wonder about the new moon before, and this shooting took place just before a new moon. Sorry, just before a full moon. So the new moon prior to the event was this was a new moon just before. And so the new moon just before, which was actually on May the 27th, so this was a couple of weeks before. I mean, it did have Pluto on the midheaven, and so and it had Uranus relatively close to the ascendant. But I think it's difficult to sort of pin this down to the location of Graz. Then, do you look at the full moon afterwards? Because there is this question with new and full moons. When do they start to work? I mean, logically, you'd think, well, they only start working when they happen. But many astrologers say that new and full moons actually start to work before they happen. So here is the full moon, just the full moon after the event, and this may be of interest because remember, at the actual shooting, Venus was on the midheaven. And it was square Pluto, and in this case, in this chart, Pluto is exactly square the midheaven. So if we compare the full moon before, but the full moon immediately, which happened the day afterwards, set for Graz, we had the ascendant at 16 degrees 35 Leo, and at the actual time of the shooting, the ascendant is 1758 Leo, and Venus is on the midheaven, and Venus is square the midheaven. Sorry, Pluto is square the midheaven, and Venus is square Pluto. So the chart of the shooting, I've taken 5 to 10 in the morning on the 10th, does seem to actually echo the full moon. So, could you have anticipated that attack? No, but if you were living in Graz and you were going to that building, and you might have noticed the full moon the next day, and you said, "Oh well, I want to avoid times when I have the same angles as that full moon." So there is evidence here that we should be looking not just at the lunation before an event, but also the lunation after the event. Now, one other thing before I talk about Gavin Newsom, it's an astronomical observation. So recently the moon has been apogee, So on the 7th of June, the moon was apogee, and what that means is the moon was furthest away from the Earth. And just to illustrate a point, I just want to show you the chart of the moon being apogee on the 7th. And so this was a moment of apogee, June the 7th. I got it around 11:33 a.m. So when the moon was furthest away from the Earth, and this is a reminder of what true black moon Lilith is. True black moon Lilith is always the point. I mean, you probably know this already, but I just wanted to just show the point. True black moon Lilith is the point at which is the point in space that the moon occupies when it is furthest away from the Earth. So on the 7th, at that exact moment in time, when the moon was furthest from the Earth, by definition, the moon was conjunct true black moon Lilith. Now, what if I were to change that chart to make it the mean black moon Lilith? And so let me just So we're going to look at we're going to switch to the mean black moon Lilith, and you can see that the mean black moon Lilith is actually 4 degrees away from the moon. Now that's illogical, isn't it? Because you would have expected at the exact moment of the moon being apogee for the moon to be exactly conjunct black moon Lilith. It's exactly conjunct true black moon Lilith, but not exactly conjunct mean black moon Lilith. And so because of that, I'm just reminding you that if you are using true black moon Lilith, I mean, I may be in a different view, but I'm using that to say that if you're going to use if you're going to use black moon Lilith, got to use true black moon Lilith. Do not use mean black moon Lilith. At least that is my advice. There may be an alternative view. I'm not an astronomer. I mean, it's a true black moon. Black moon Lilith is not something I put great store in. I mean, I don't use it all the time, but that is a real argument for using the true black moon Lilith rather than the mean black moon Lilith. And now I just want to finish up by talking about Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump. I talked about Gavin Newsom yesterday, and with Gavin Newsom, here is his chart, and so there is a lot going on with Gavin Newsom, as I mentioned yesterday. The fact that we had this full moon at 20 degrees Gemini, so the full moon is right on Gavin Newsom's midheaven. It's square his ascendant, it's square his Pluto, it's so the full moon is at 20 Sagittarius, so it's opposition his midheaven. He's got full moon on his Mars. So this full moon is a really big deal for Gavin Newsom. And it's just interesting because I talked about the fact that Trump is impacted by this full moon as well. And so if we compare Donald Trump, and if we look at the synastry between Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom, so here is Gavin Newsom, and so I put sort of Gavin Newsom is in the inner wheel, Donald Trump is on the outer wheel. And so Donald Trump's North Node is right on Trump's midheaven, and Gavin Newsom's midheaven. I mean, Trump has this conjunction between the Sun, North Node, and Uranus. And this conjunction is right on Gavin Newsom's midheaven. Now, you could argue that this conjunction actually helps Gavin Newsom. There's something about Donald Trump that is allowing Gavin Newsom to get in the headlines. Maybe it's helping him politically. And of course, what we've got these riots in Los Angeles, and obviously Donald Trump wants to really deport people, deport illegal immigrants. That was a manifesto promise. In this video, I'm not going to give any opinions here on the subject. I'm just pointing it out. And I think that probably the reality is that Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom are probably good for each other. I mean, if you're Gavin Newsom, you want to be relevant in the light of the Democrats having just had this huge loss. Presumably Gavin Newsom is thinking to himself, oh, Donald Trump, the whole thing will end in disaster. He can be presidential candidate, Democrat candidate. He can win the primaries and win the 2028 presidential election. That's what he's thinking. And so Donald Trump's actions, from his perspective, are making him relevant. But it works for Trump as well. Trump is able to use Gavin Newsom, who is, like Trump, is a very divisive figure, to make himself look good. These are the Democrats that want to allow all these illegal immigrants in, and look what he's done to California. So you might say that Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump are really helping each other in terms of their own political careers. And so, yeah, this full moon has really galvanized the relationship between the two men, and we're no doubt going to see more of it. And the question is, how is it going to work out? I mean, I did look at the composite chart between Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump, which is here. I don't think that this composite chart is especially significant, but it's got Mercury and Virgo rising, so there's a lot to be said. Saturn is on the midheaven. moon trine Pluto, and it's not a chart that I find to be particularly impressive. And one other thing about Gavin Newsom is his solar arc directions. So Gavin Newsom, he's what, 50? Was he 50? He's Gavin Newsom. I think he turned 57 in his last birthday. So here are his. That's his. Let's just look at his solar arc directions. Yeah, here's Gavin Newsom's solar arc directions. So if we move everything sort of 57 degrees, what's kind of interesting is Gavin Newsom's solar arc directed node. So his natal north node is at 28 Aries, and so if we direct his north node, this moves to 25 Gemini. So his directed north node is square his natal Uranus, and I think this does describe what is happening. The riots in Los Angeles. This is a very Uranus event, and it's certainly part of his destiny, but I wonder, to what extent is it really working in his favor? And, we shouldn't forget with Gavin Newsom that he does have Saturn in Aries. And so him being 57 years old, he's coming up to his second Saturn return. And, Saturn in Aries is not the best place for Saturn. It really isn't. It's fallen. It's fallen. He has Saturn in the 7th house in his Western chart. His Saturn. I think his Saturn is in the 8th house in his Vedic chart. His Saturn is not in Aries Vedically, but Western chart. He's coming up to the Saturn return. Saturn in Aries, and I think he has to watch out for this Saturn return. This Saturn return could actually cause him quite a lot of damage. Now he's not going to get the exact Saturn return this year, but that is going to come next year. Saturn goes retrograde, relatively soon. But next year there'll be Saturn moving into Aries. Saturn will move back into Aries. So he has his Saturn return, and that Saturn return may not help him. And also, after his Saturn return, Saturn will move on and make a square to his moon in Capricorn. Gavin Newsom has to be careful how he handles the situation. My hunch, not astrologically, would be that it will backfire. And do not underestimate the silent majority. And people don't like to see riots on the streets. Are they going to blame Trump? I think in the end they might blame Gavin Newsom. Now, that's just an opinion. I'm not using astrology for that. Now, I just wanted to finish by looking at Gavin Newsom's Vedic chart, because there are some things that really need to be noticed with what we need to observe with Gavin Newsom's Vedic chart. And Gavin Newsom, being born in California, the great thing about being born in California is you have a time of birth. Generally, that's what happens with people born in California. I'm not quite sure how that works, but So here is Gavin Newsom's Vedic chart, and so now Gavin Newsom's Vedic chart in many respects is really good. There are some really good things going on in his chart. He has Venus-Jupiter conjunction in the first house, because there is the first house, and that is really very fortunate. He also has the moon in the 5th, and the ruler of the 5th is Jupiter. So the 5th tends to be a fortunate house in Vedic astrology. So having the ruler of the 5th house in the first house, that is great, particularly as it's Jupiter conjunct Venus. Jupiter is, by Shadvala, is a relatively strong planet, and he's got the moon in the 5th. So there's a lot that's really good about this chart. Now, as far as his Saturn is concerned, in his Vedic chart, Saturn is in the 8th. Saturn isn't necessarily quite so good. it's one of the weaker planets in his chart, and so him having Saturn, Saturn, him coming up with a Saturn return, may not be especially easy. Now, as far as the Vimshottari Dasha system is concerned, he is in his Jupiter Dasha. So his Jupiter Dasha started in 2014. So, I haven't really been following the precise details of his career, but, in his Jupiter Dasha, he's governor of California. Being governor of California is a big deal. Not everyone can be a governor of California. Richard Nixon, after he lost the presidential election in 1960, he tried to be governor of California and he failed. So then, of course, he won the 1968 election, and of course Ronald Reagan was governor of California. It's a big position, being governor of California. So that in itself is a sign of success, and it's happening while he's in his Jupiter Mahadasha. And his Jupiter Mahadasha continues until February 2030. So the next presidential election takes place during his Jupiter Mahadasha. And on the surface of it, that looks good. And then we have to look at his various subdashas. And looking at the subdashas, he has just entered his Jupiter Mahadasha and his Moon Subdasha. So Jupiter Major Dasha, Moon Subdasha, that started, if his time of birth is right, on June the 5th, 2025. Just a few days ago, his Moon Subdasha started. And given that the Moon is in his 5th house from Jupiter, I would have said that this Subdasha looks really good. That certainly in terms of his base, as far as his base is concerned, of, for example, positioning himself for, being the Democrat front runner in, for the primaries, which, probably people are thinking about. The Democrats are already thinking about it now. It's really helping him politically. I think it actually could be helping Trump politically as well. And so this Jupiter main period, Moon sub period, will continue through until October of next year. And so you could say, looking at this one thing in isolation, between now and October 2026, things are looking really good for Gavin Newsom. Then, in October 2026, he moves into his Jupiter Mahadasha and his Mars Subdasha. And that takes him through until September 2027. Now, his Mars is really strong by Shadbala. He's got Mars in Scorpio in his Eastern chart, in his Vedic chart, and it's angular. And Mars is by Shadbala, it's the strongest planet in his chart. Does that mean that his Moon major period, Mars subperiod, is going to be fortunate? Not necessarily. A strong Mars can be absolutely treacherous. I've got Mars in the first house, Mars in Aries, and Mars is far and away the strongest planet in my Vedic chart. And when I moved, I was really excited about my Mars Mahadasha starting. I'm really into it. It was a complete disaster, absolute disaster. And so Mars can just be too much of a good thing, and it can be treacherous. So I would need to give this some thought. But he's in his Western chart, he's got Mars on the IC, and of course we've just got a full moon on his Mars. So this Mars on the 4th house and the 8th is really being activated. But of course, the Mars Dasha doesn't start until 2026. But even if Mars is, even if the Mars dasha does work out, then the last dasha of his Jupiter dasha, Jupiter major dasha, Rahu sub dasha, which takes it. This is the final sub dasha of his Jupiter dasha, is in November September the 11th, 2027. That's Rahu. That's more treacherous, and so I'm thinking possibly that what we're seeing now between now and October of next year could be the absolute peak of Gavin Newsom's profile, and I'm thinking that there's a real possibility, as far as Gavin Newsom and his presidential aspiration is, that he's peaking too early, and I think that even by the time of the Democrat primaries, he may be past peak, and he might still be in his Jupiter dasha, but I think it's not necessarily going to be working out for him. But it could be just a case of Gavin Newsom right now. Well, he might as well enjoy his moment, but I'm not convinced that it's going to last beyond October 2026, and when his Jupiter major period Mars subdasha comes in. Well, you can look at it in several different ways. As I said, Vedic astrology can be treacherous. It can be very accurate, but it can be treacherous, and you can get things badly wrong. So I don't think one should assume that his Mars dasha, just because his Mars is so strong, that after September 2027, things are going to be wonderful for him. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but maybe you have a different view. But you might have more experience of Vedic astrology than me, but I think that's something that Vedic astrologers do need to consider. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Gavin Newsom. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.